The focus of the new Formula One 2026 regulations, presented in preview during the Canadian Grand Prix weekend, is related to power units. The engines will undergo the biggest changes and will have different characteristics that will also affect the performance of the cars. The main goal of the new regulations has always been to attract new car manufacturers, previously deterred by the complexity and costs of current power units. Closely linked to the features of the new power units are the changes related to the cars, which will be shorter, narrower, and about 30 kilograms lighter. Active aerodynamics will also be introduced to compensate for the loss of cornering ability due to the lower aerodynamic load. To begin with, an element of active aerodynamics already exists in the current generation of cars, the DRS. In general, active aerodynamics refers to an aerodynamic profile, front and rear wings, whose angle can be varied at any time via an actuator. What we will see in 2026 will be a significant evolutionary step compared to the current DRS. In 2026, not only the rear wing will be mobile, but also the front wing. It will be possible to switch between two aerodynamic configurations, X mode and Z mode. FIA single-seater technical director, Nikolas Tombazis, explained on the Beyond the Grid podcast why it was necessary to introduce new regulations regarding chassis that take into account the characteristics of the new power units. He stated that cars need less drag and less aerodynamic resistance, and that the new technical regulations aim to address this issue. The total power provided by the 2026 engines is expected to be higher than the current ones, although with different characteristics of the power unit. The engine will have much lower power from internal combustion, dropping from about 550 to about 400 kilowatts, which is from about 750 horsepower to about 550. Meanwhile, the electric part will increase significantly, going from 120 to 350 kilowatts, or from about 160 horsepower to about 475. This results in an almost 50-50 ratio between internal combustion engine power and electric energy. In this process, they have removed the MGU-H, the device that converts part of the exhaust energy into electric energy. This rethink of the power units and the removal of the MGU-H were designed to make hybrid engines simpler, with the intent of attracting new manufacturers. The director of the single-seater department of the FIA confirmed that this was done mainly for simplicity and to reduce the complexity of the engines, ensuring they could attract newcomers to the sport, which seems to have been quite successful. He referred to the expected entries of Audi and Ford, the latter with Red Bull technology, in 2026, and the announced entry of General Motors in 2028. Another novelty related to the Formula One 2026 engines that the FIA has focused on is sustainable fuels. Nikolas Tombazis added that this is an important step, noting that in 2026 the fuel will be completely sustainable, which is one of the big steps towards sustainability, even though it is not the definitive step. One other key aspect worth pointing out is the fact that the 2026 Formula One cars will never be like the rendering the FIA presented before the Canadian Grand Prix last weekend. In the meeting held by the teams on Saturday at the Montreal circuit with the championship promoter, the team principals pointed out that some aspects that should characterize the so-called agile cars are unrealistic. The teams have conducted their simulations, which showed that the weight reduction of about 30 kilograms will be practically impossible since the weight of the power units has been increased from 151 kilograms to 185 kilograms, a delta that exceeds the weight savings desired. In the federal legislators' idea, there is a desire to reduce the dimensions of the cars, 20 centimeters in wheelbase, 10 centimeters in width, by narrowing the tires, which will remain 18 inches. But these measures would not be enough to compensate for the weight increase allowed to the engine manufacturers, even if the use of metal matrix, magnesium, and titanium in the construction of some parts were authorized. The International Federation is aware that efforts must be made on the chassis part to achieve the project target. But the teams fear that by liberalizing noble materials, there will only be a significant rise in costs for a modest weight reduction. According to the teams, the performance of the car proposed by the FIA will not be adequate for the pinnacle series of world motorsport, closer to Formula 2 than the current Formula 1. Therefore, the idea will be to change the approach, the change in aerodynamic philosophy, reintroducing a flat bottom instead of venturi channels and reducing the effectiveness of the rear diffuser to cut down aerodynamic load by 30%. does not seem the best way to achieve a good final result. The draft regulation, once approved by the FIA World Council, can be amended, but changing the rules will require the majority of the teams. And it will not be easy to find full cooperation from the teams without someone trying to gain advantages by bringing ideas and solutions they are more familiar with. In short, we should prepare for a rather turbulent phase of rule definition in which the political aspect could have a much greater weight than the technical and sporting one. Someone has thought of increasing the availability of fuel for the thermal engine to avoid situations where a power unit with a depleted battery could run with almost 50% less power. Nikolas Tombazis, the FIA's head of single-seaters, hopes there will be cooperation from the manufacturers to find a regulatory synthesis that allows for the approval of a 2026 Formula One regulation in line with expectations. The doubt is that an underground battle with low blows might ensue. It's also interesting to note that Adrian Newey has expressed some concerns regarding the new 2026 technical regulations officially announced by the FIA. In the midst of the regulatory cycle for ground effect cars, Formula One is already looking ahead to 2026, the year when the new technical regulations will debut. These will feature significant innovations, including active aerodynamics and the introduction of the override mode, and will mark a clear break from the current generation of cars. However, several industry insiders have raised more than a few concerns about these regulations, which have indeed attracted major manufacturers such as Audi, but still leave several technical question marks. Speaking on the subject in his column for Motorsport magazine, Adrian Newey commented on the 2026 outlook, noting that the FIA seems to have been heavily influenced by one or two manufacturers, hoping to please them while also attracting others. Adrian Newey supposed that, since Audi will participate in 2026, there has been partial success in this regard, but he was not sure it was worth the overall effort for what might be achieved. He emphasized that manufacturers come and go, except for Ferrari, and that it is the teams that drive the business, with the big attraction being the audience. According to the British engineer, who recently confirmed he is leaving Red Bull, it is essential to offer the audience a good show, and part of this variety is well rewarded. He pointed out that if you look at IndyCar until 1990, there were a large number of manufacturers, and it was very popular, even competing with the FIA. However, it became a single brand, and its popularity decreased. Adrian Newey also could not ignore the sustainability factor, with Formula One increasingly focused on being green and pioneering technologies to be applied in road cars. He remarked that if governments insist on zero emissions, the internal combustion engine is not in a good position. The legendary British car designer, who will most likely join Ferrari in 2025, concluded that if one commits to a zero-carbon footprint, all possibilities open up. Biofuels are an interesting and growing concept, though it is not clear if they will ever be fully price competitive.